surprised it didn't say recording in progress. It normally does. You guys can hear me, correct? I'm guessing you guys can.
We can hear you, and it said recording in progress on my end.
So there's a link to the notes, and that's what we're going to be covering tonight. Let me get one other set of notes for you. Here we go. Now, I think most of you guys should have this already, but this is all of the vocab from the American Board of Funeral Service Education. Now, that is not so much for the jurisprudence exam, but it is for the national board exam, and I just want to make sure that everybody has it. And again, I'm hoping you guys can hear me. If you can't, let me know. But I should be coming through, and you probably hear my kids watching some goofy show in the background. But let me get my notes in front of me here, and then we can get started on this. So these are the notes we'll be covering tonight. And again, it doesn't cover everything, but it covers a lot of what the feedback we've gotten has been very positive in what we've covered for this. The JP exam, and just to give you the breakdown on it, it's given at the school, but we have nothing to do with it. It just happens to be we're geographically centered in the state, and our testing center, or the school, has a contract with the State Board of Mortuary Science. So the exam is given, and again, they switched it up a couple of times since COVID started, but it's normally given on the third Friday of February, the third Friday of July, and the third Friday of October, and at 11 a.m. Now, they normally want you to get there at least a half an hour ahead of time. I'd say shoot for at least 45 minutes ahead of time. It doesn't hurt to sit down and review stuff before you actually go in to take it. The test traditionally is only about 50 questions, but they have been varying on that. So I can't say for sure because they won't tell me the specifics on it for various reasons. I mean, obviously they don't want me to know what's on the test. So I can tell you, oh, here's exactly what's on test question 3 or something. So here's where remember, look at the statutes and the regulations. The statutes come from the legislature, and the regulations come from the state board. When they switched, for example, the issue with food in the funeral home, that came from the governor's office, not from the state board. So again, you need to look at both. They're long. New Jersey's involved. I thought the state board was harder than the national when I took it. It was involved. Back in those days, it was just true and false questions. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. They have gotten into more multiple choice questions and things like that, but read the question, see what they're asking you. When I took it, for example, there was a list of 7 chemicals that could not be used in embalming fluids. And again, it's an irrelevant thing because we don't make embalming fluid, but it was like 6 of them were correct and 1 of them was not. So the question was true, false. These 7 chemicals cannot be used in embalming fluid, and like arsenic and mercury and whatever else. And then the last one was like formaldehyde. So that question was false. Although 6 of the ones that they showed us were true, the 1 was not. So it made the question false. So always read the question, see what the hell they're asking you. So other examples, health and vital statistics. And again, you don't need to know these numbers. Don't waste your time like memorizing where these things come from. This is just for reference. A license versus a certificate of registration. Remember, a license is for the individual, a COR, certificate of registration, is for the funeral home. Death certificate versus a burial permit versus a transit permit. And the weird thing with the transit permit is that you just magically click a little button and a burial permit or a disposition permit becomes a transit permit. You would think there would be more involved in it. Not that I'm looking for a lot of government overreach on these things, but you just magically click it and you go, yeah, you can ship somebody on a plane. That's not a problem. Like, it's sort of odd the way that they overregulate everything else. When you get something like that, it's okay, it's fine. Arrange and pre-arrangement, the idea that who can sell merchandise, who can sign forms, and you need to be a licensee to do all of this. As an intern, you can make arrangements, but you're doing it under the supervision of your preceptor. You can't just pull out a statement of good services and sign off on it. You can do everything else. You just can't do that. It's under the guise that they're looking everything over and saying, okay, this is proper, this is accurate. Who can sign a death certificate? Who can embalm? Now, you can embalm as an intern, but it's supposed to be under the supervision of your preceptor. Your preceptor can't leave and go, I'm going to go to Florida for 2 weeks. You run the operation while I'm gone. They're supposed to be available to you. Now, here's a weird thing. I doubt you'll see questions about it just because things have been wonky. At the point of disposition, it was always that an intern could not take a decedent to the point of disposition. Like, you couldn't just have the intern take somebody to the crematory. But during the pandemic, they relaxed that and just said, all right, we'll allow them to do so. I'm unclear when they're going to revert on that. But because of the pandemic, I doubt that you'll see questions on it, but you never know. But you are allowed to supervise visitation. You don't have to be licensed to do so. Dress, casket, to do a removal. You don't need a license to do any of that. Remember the license renewal. They're big on asking questions about time periods, on dates, the idea that a funeral home needs to be renewed, every other year, but that's on the even years. Whereas as an individual, as a licensee, you need to renew on the odd years. On the way I've always remembered this, you probably heard me say it in class, every funeral director I know is an oddball, and that's the way that I remember this. That, like, in 2013 they need to be reviewed, 2015, 2017, 2019. You get the point. But it's one of those deals that a funeral home is on even years, a funeral director is on odd years. A renewal expectations. Look at the continuing education. What is required of you? It's 10 credits. What's required in those 10 credits? And we'll unpack that a little bit in a bit, but all of this stuff comes up. License renewal. If your license has lapsed, and we'll talk about this because this changed in 2019. So we're going to start seeing questions come out about now that have been tweaked in the interim, because it used to be different if you were less than 5 years out or more than 5 years out, and they've switched this, and we'll unpack that in a little bit. But some continuing education courses and programs must be approved by the board. So you can't just have a continuing ed class that, you go, well, I went to a class at the local college on death and dying. No, it has to be approved by the state board prior to you taking it. It has to be set up for continuing ed. Now, they do extend this to other things. Let's say you wrote an article, or let's say you wrote a book or something. They may give you credit for that, but everything has to be approved by them. You can't just go, wow, I took these classes. Why aren't you giving me credit for it? Pre-need providers must monitor attendance and ensure completion of the lessons. If you go to a continuing education class, you can't be gone for more than 10 minutes. And it used to be like 15. And if you're at the state, like something through the state association, they'll scan your badge if you have to step out to use the restroom or take a phone call or something, and you can't be gone for more than 10 minutes. And if you are, too bad, and they have to monitor and make sure that you are in fact there. The CEU instructor must maintain records for 5 years. And again, this doesn't really, again, it's a dumb thing. It's important to have it in the code, but it's dumb to test on it, but they do. And time frames, amount that you have to pay for anything, whether that be for your license or for the to become an intern, all of that stuff they test you on. I don't know why. I think it's silly, but it is what it is, just what they do. Now, and this is what changed in the last couple of years. In 2019, they changed this. It used to be you could have an inactive license. One of the instructors at school, Paul Paget, his grandfather had an inactive license, and he would just come in. He would, as an inactive license, you weren't really allowed to do anything, but you could still be in advertising and things like that. And he was a much older fellow, and they would run his name in ads because people knew him and they liked him. They would come, he buried my dad in 1978, and I've been friends with him ever since. Whatever, they've done away with the inactive license. As of 2019, that's gone. You don't have inactive licenses anymore. You're either licensed or you're not. So here are more of these changes. So license restoration. If it was less than 5 years, I would say you had to complete all delinquent continuing education up to 25 hours. I haven't been drinking. I just can't get the damn words out tonight, which would make sense in that it's 2.5 years. I'm sorry, 2.5 licensing periods, 10 credits per, which would equal 25 credits. They did away with that. Now they only require fees and CEUs for the current and previous licensing period. Also, New Jersey now recognizes out-of-state CEUs for licensure, meaning that you let your license lapse for 4 years, let's say, but you're licensed in Pennsylvania. They're not going to make you do the full 20 credits. They can only make you do the 10 credits. But if you've already been doing credits in Pennsylvania, and let's say you've got 12 credits there because they require 6 each licensing period, they will recognize that and go, okay, you only need to make up the 8. So yeah, they don't require the full 25, let's say. It's just that last licensing period. Actually, I need to correct myself, because if you didn't done 2 sessions of relicensure in Pennsylvania, that would be 12 credits. That would be enough. They would recognize that. Don't mind it. My wife is yelling at the kids and the dogs, but what do you do? So if it lapsed more than 5 years, and here's what was weird. Before, they would say, okay, you need to do 25 credits, and then you need to do a mini internship, which involved all the stuff, three months to a year, 25 embalmings, funerals, arrangements, retake and pass the jurisprudence exam. Now they do this on a case-by-case basis, and nobody knows what the hell this means. Nobody has tested this yet. So you go in, and your license has been lapsed for 6 years, let's say. Well, they may say, okay, you need to do some sort of an internship. Maybe you need to do the jurisprudence exam. But we don't know. We just don't know. They're going to figure it out on a case-by-case basis, which is strange, but it has not been tested. So nobody has any solid answers on this yet. Like I said, these regulations just went through in 2019, and the world came to a standstill in 2020. So there's just no solid explanation of what you need to do in these situations. So record keeping, take a look at record keeping. A lot of this stuff, excuse me, I leave intentionally blank, meaning that I want you to look it up on your own. What do they require you to keep in your record keeping? Now, you have to keep a funeral record for 7 years. You have to keep a GPL for 3 years, according to the state. You have to keep it for 1 year, according to the FTC. But I want you to look all this stuff up. Itemization, that goes back to the FTC. How can you handle grouping things together into packages, things like that? FTC forms for New Jersey compliance. And again, New Jersey is stricter than the FTC is, but you have to know the difference between the two. And this is really more, there may be FTC questions on the state exam, but you're going to see them more in the national exam than you will on the state board exam. But you need to know the difference. And like I said before, like the GPL, for example, you have to keep that for 3 years for New Jersey, 1 year for the FTC. You have to know these differences on them. Prep room expectations, equipment, structures, prohibitions. So the idea, and I specifically do not go through this stuff because you need to take a look at it. What instruments are you required to have? And then the inspector comes in, they'll ask you, like, do you have a trocar? Do you have at least one aneurysm hook? Do you have a drain tube? Do you have a scalpel, etc.? What is that list? the idea of the structure, and they really go into detail on this, and they say like you need to have, and it's silly, but you need to have walls that go floor to ceiling, so you can't just have a corner in your viewing room that you just put up a little curtain around, and that's where you're going to embalm. And likewise, you can't just have a room, you have to have a room that's solely specified for embalming. It can't be that you use it for embalming during, when nobody's there, but then during viewings, you have it as a restroom. It doesn't work that way. And then prohibitions, what are you not allowed to have inside of the prep room? And it's all laid out in the regulation, and the regulations where they really get into the grit of it all. The regulation, the laws are broader, and the regulation really gets into the fine detail of everything. And again, you have to know both, but that's really where you're going to find the detail on it, is in the regs, everything that comes from the state board versus what comes from the legislature. FTC telephone price disclosures. This was changed a little bit in 2019. In 2019, it said the manager may designate an employee, even if unlicensed, to provide price info on the phone. And if you are, my wife works at a funeral home, she's not licensed. If somebody calls up, they need a price, she can open up a general price list and just read to them, here's how much a direct cremation costs, here's how much a burial will cost with whatever you are looking for in this particular situation. She can't sit down and write up a statement of funeral goods and services, but she can give the basic information of it all. I don't think you'll see a lot of questions about this, but it's just important to understand who can and who cannot. Now, responding to questions concerning information not on the price list shall be referred to a licensee or an intern. That was changed in 2019, meaning if you're an intern, okay, you're allowed to sit down, and if there are questions about the pricing, you're allowed to explain it to them. It doesn't mean you're allowed to sign a statement of funeral goods and services, but you are allowed to go through these procedures with them and lay everything out, so long as a licensee takes a look at it. Let's say you are sitting down and arrange it. Somebody shows up at the funeral home Saturday afternoon, and you're doing some paperwork, and somebody shows up, and the director's upstairs up in the apartment, and you go, okay, and they go, just sit down with them. You can sit down, you can go through everything with them, but it still means the director needs to review everything and sign off on it. You're not allowed to do so, but you are allowed to get into too much further depth than just a general employee. And the multiple ownership disclosure. If you own more than one funeral home, you have to disclose it on the general price list. A person who owns 50% or greater of the interest in this mortuary also owns 50% or greater interest in the following registered mortuaries in the state of New Jersey, along with the name of the funeral home and the municipality. For 2019, the multiple ownership disclosure only needs to be on the general price list, meaning that if you have three price lists, you don't have to put it on all three. But the fear and the idea behind this was that you own two funeral homes in town, a family walks in, and you go, the total price is $7,500. And they go, that's outrageous. I won't pay more than $69.99. And they storm out and they go to the next funeral home that you happen to own. And you call over there and go, don't charge me more than $69.99. That's kind of a silly fear, but that was where this came from. And again, remember, this is a New Jersey thing, not a federal thing. So mortuary use issues. It used to be that you could not use a site in funeral home for recovering organs or tissues, including DNA. Now, that never prevented somebody from having an autopsy at the funeral home, but you just couldn't use the funeral home to collect DNA. And this has grown in popularity. And there are companies out there that you can take some DNA, whether that be from a cheek swab or whatever, you send it off to them and they can save that, and who knows, you can clone the person someday. But now they allow you may collect a lock of hair for the family, and it's always been the case. So it's one thing they always allowed, but you can collect DNA via cheek swab, nail clippings, and or blood collection. So even if you take a vial of blood and you send it off to one of these cryogenic companies or whatever, you're allowed to do that now. Now, maybe the site of examination to determine cause and manner of death. That's always been the case. I've seen many private autopsies at funeral homes wherein, and it's expensive. It's like 6 or 7 grand to get a pathologist to come in and do it. But yeah, you're allowed to do so. Now, food in the mortuary, this is overturned August of 2019. You are now allowed to serve food and non-alcoholic beverages, but it cannot be prepared at the funeral home. You can't have a kitchen where you're cooking it all up, but somebody comes in. If you have a place I work, they're putting in a coffee bar. So you can, they'll have a Keurig there and they'll pick up donuts or whatever. I think it's a nice thing, but like I said, previous to this, you weren't allowed to have anything other than water. But today, you're allowed to have anything other than alcoholic beverages, so long as you're not preparing it there at the funeral home. Now, if you close a funeral home, did I jump on over? No, this is all new to 2019. That's what it is. And we'll look at what you need to do if you do close a funeral home. But the new, as the regs in 2019, when they changed, you must show evidence to the state board that the EDRS account is closed. So you have to show them that. You must inform the state board of the location and individual in charge of the funeral home records. And these records must be kept for 7 years. And the same is true of funeral home records. They have to be kept for 7 years. Now, the first year need to be available immediately. So if somebody comes in, and today's what, February the 3rd? Yeah, because yesterday was Groundhog's Day, right? So February the 3rd, 2021, you have to have all those records immediately available. The previous 6 years have to be available within 2 weeks. And the same is true if you close a funeral home for 7 years. Whoever's taking the records, you close, and your competition ran you out of business, and they're brand X funeral home. But they go, yeah, great, we'll take your records, we'll help you out, whatever. They have to have that first year available immediately, and then previous 6 years have to be available within 2 weeks. All right, so interns and intern regulations, preceptor qualifications, you have to be licensed for at least 2 years and licensed in good standing. You can't have any arrests and you can't be convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude in the last 5 years. Each funeral home, regardless of its size, can only have 2 interns. I've always thought this was silly. If you're, and the basic regulation says that as a funeral home, you can have an intern if you do at least 25 calls a year, excluding stillbirths. And this goes back to the idea that, let's say somebody gets out of high school and it's their family funeral home, and they do 25 a year, and every single one of them is embalmed, and they have a funeral for them, and you work every single one of them within 3 years, you can be licensed. You can hit all of the intern qualifications. But if somebody's doing 1,000 a year, you would think they would extend that. They do not. You can have, each funeral home can have 2 interns, but they have to have at least 2 directors. One director cannot have more than 1 intern underneath of them. And internship specifics, what we talked about before, the time, the 2 years by default. If you have more than 90 credits prior to funeral service education, like you have a bachelor's degree before you did the funeral program, then it drops that down to 1 year. It can go up to 3 years though. As far as the cases, you have to have the 75 embalmings, 75 funerals, and 25 sets of funeral arrangements. Now, the background on it, you have to have at least 60 credits prior to funeral service education. They don't care what 60 credits is in, just so long as it exists. Now, an internship extension, they will give you a 3rd year without question. And they'll normally give you even on top of that 6 months or so, but it requires written authorization to do so, meaning you have to send a letter to them saying, may I please extend my internship? Now, if you fail the state board practical, right, they come out and they want you embalm, they say you're not to par, then basically what you end up having to do is you have to wait at least 30 days, and then you have to pay the fees again and apply again, and it gets $125. And all of those fees are important. What does it cost to register for the practical? What does it cost to register as an intern? They ask questions about that, which I think are so silly, but this is what they draft the questions on. Now, concurrent internship, unlike our friends in Pennsylvania who have to wait. You can probably hear that. Don't mind my 3-year-old. She's just running around the backyard, not in the backyard. It's getting cold for that. But unlike our friends in Pennsylvania who have to do the schooling and then they start their resident internship, in New Jersey, we do our internship at the same time that we do our schooling. However, they don't consider that a concurrent internship, although you're doing it concurrently. Here's what they consider a concurrent internship. Let's go back to that scenario. You get done high school and you're going to do your 60 credits that are required before you start funeral service education. Well, that 60 credits would be your concurrent internship. And there's a different regulation during that time, meaning that at the end of every semester, you have to send your transcripts into the state and you have to keep at least 8 credits per semester. And you have to keep at least a GPA of 2.0. While you're doing your quote unquote third year, they don't consider that a current internship, although it's being done concurrently. So it makes no sense by their definitions whatsoever, but that's what it is. A current internship is if you're doing your internship and getting your 75, 75, 25 while you are doing the initial 60 credits that's required. So new for 2019, preceptors cannot be convicted of a crime within 5 years. It said it must be a crime related to funeral service or moral turpitude, meaning you have to, if somebody gets popped with a DUI or something, all right, whatever. But if you have raided the pre-need funds and stolen them or done something wrong with families, that's different. Or if it is something of higher level, meaning that if rape or murder or something along those lines. Can I have revocation, suspension, or surrender of license from any professional board, meaning somebody is they run a funeral home here in New Jersey, but they are also a hairdresser. And for whatever reason, their license gets suspended as a hairdresser. Well, no, they're not allowed to be a preceptor now. So again, the new things in 2019, which should start showing up in the questions relatively soon, if not now, licensees are now required to notify the board in writing within 30 days upon conviction of any crime or arrest, summons, indictment, admission into pretrial detention, guilty plea to any violation of law, ordinance, felony, DUI, misdemeanor, or disorderly offense in New Jersey or any other jurisdiction. Meaning you're over in Pennsylvania and you get a DUI or something, you need to tell the board within 30 days. And it used to just be during your new licensing period, because we always looked forward to reading the forum, because that was 2 years worth of it. And you would say, oh my God, so-and-so got a DWI or whatever the case would be. And now it's every month this pops up because you need to notify them within 30 days. And it used to just be during the next licensing period. Like normal tickets, speeding tickets, they don't care about that. Parking ticket or something, they don't care. The state board in 2019 again clarified intern responsibilities, saying they are allowed to participate in funeral arrangements, preservation, washing, or disposal of dead human bodies, making funeral arrangements on behalf of any licensed practitioner of mortuary science, meaning your preceptor is friendly with the funeral home and they ask you to come in to make a set of arrangements, you're allowed to do so. Again, so long as they review that before and they sign off on it before it's actually submitted to the family, the statement of funeral goods and services. And quoting prices when making funeral arrangements, when funeral arrangements are being made. So you're allowed to do all of that. Now, things got really weird in 2020 during the pandemic, and they started to allow interns to take decedents to the place of disposition. I don't know. I doubt you'll see questions about that, just because the waters are a little murky right now, but normally you wouldn't be allowed to do that. They've allowed it for the meantime, and we'll see where they go in the future with this. They haven't switched it back yet, but I just don't know when they will or if they will, but I doubt you'll see questions about that. Preceptor is responsible for reviewing and executing statement of goods and services with the intern before providing it to the consumer for review. So if you write everything up, you got to have the preceptor come in, take a look at it, and before giving it to the family. Interns and advertisements. You now have to put in if an intern in an ad or website or social media, so listed as John Doe, whatever intern, intern registration number 1234, whatever it is. So you now need to put in your intern number on any advertisement that you are in which you're included. So forms of ownership, and this is all stuff we've covered before, the idea of you can have a corporate holding, and again, look all this stuff up. And if you have questions, reach out to me. But what is a corporate holder of your SCI? What do you need to disclose to people? The use of the manager name, titles on the sign, etc. You can have the title manager, you can have the title senior director, you have the title executive director, but you can only use one of them. It has to either be on the sign or at the entrance, or at or close to the entrance. It doesn't have to be on both. And this is one of the situations where you need to have the lettering at 1.5 inches high and that whole bit. Death of an owner. How long do you have to notify the state board of the death, and who is going to be the new manager, who is actually going to be running the place? If there's a new installation, meaning a new funeral home. So if you buy a funeral home, that's a new installation because you're a new owner. If you take a funeral home, please put that down. It's don't worry about it. If you buy a funeral home, and it's the Smith funeral home, you're taking it over, well, that's a new installation. If the Smith funeral home decides to move a block down the street because they decided they like that building down there more, again, that's a new installation. They don't view it as the funeral home that it's been for 80 years or whatever it's been. So all of these things, take a look at these definitions. What do you need to do? And things like with the pre-need and notifying people within 30 days that there is a new owner. And even if it's the same ownership and you're just moving buildings, it's still considered a new installation. You still need to send the people who have prepaid, not the people that have prearranged, but the people who have prepaid. You need to send them a letter saying, yes, you have, if you want to, you can switch funeral homes. You can get your money back if it's revocable. You can cash out, you can switch, you can do whatever, you can stay with us if you want, whatever you would like to do. What's required if you close a funeral home? And they have switched this a little bit in 2019. And the regs, like I said, if I teach laws, rules, and regulations, I have the notes sitting in front of me. For this particular review, I intentionally leave them out. I want you to look this stuff up. What sticks out to me is you need to stop the phones. You need to tell the state board that the phones have been stopped. You need to cover up the sign or take the sign down. You need to tell them that the EDRS account has been closed. You need to send them a copy of your pre-need forms. No, your pre-need forms, but the pre-need ledger. But there's more to it than that. And again, I intentionally do it just so that you guys will look this stuff up. You can find it in the regulations. Unlicensed owners are absolutely allowed to be there. I always say, when I was a kid, my dad owned the funeral home and he died in 1985, and my mom took it over, and she wasn't licensed until 1988. That's perfectly legal. She just had to have a manager there, and he ran the day-to-day operations. All right, so pre-need has to be a licensee doing it, which again makes sense. What signatures are needed on the forms? And again, it's things like, okay, you're going to need the funeral director, the purchaser, and then whoever is actually the funeral recipient if you're doing the trust. Because if it's money against their name, then they have to pay the taxes on that. So you need their verification as well. So even if there's a very nice neighbor who comes in and pays for the funeral, it's under John Smith's name. Well, if it's in a trust, he still has to pay tax on that every year. And it may only amount to a couple of dollars, but you still need that signature. And in most cases, in a situation like that, you'd be getting it from a POA. But, again, what signatures are needed? And they can craft questions around those things. Trust accounts, the idea that, again, we can put things into a trust. At what point does it switch to a point where they can then take 1% of the interest gained? And the answer is 200 accounts, meaning you need somebody to manage that. And they're allowed to take 1% of the interest at that point. Like Choices is allowed to take 1% of the interest because they send out a lot of paperwork. They need somebody there overseeing that. If there's a change of funeral home, how long do you have to actually give them to switch the funeral home? So you meet the Smith family and they go, no, we don't. 5 years later, they go, we don't like it anymore. We want to go to Brand X down the street. We want you to switch our paid account over. How long do you have to switch it? I know the answer. I'm not going to give it to you. Look it up, please. It's not uncommon for that stuff to come up. Pre-need ledger. What needs to be in it? And the one thing I will give you with the pre-need ledger, because they recently changed it, doesn't have to be in print anymore. You can have a digital copy of it, which makes sense because everything is digitized anymore. Cancellation fee, you cannot have one. It doesn't matter if you met with somebody for 6 hours over a set of arrangements. They give you a check. They decide a week later, or a month later, or a year later, or a day later, I don't want to be with you anymore. I want to do the exact same funeral at the neighboring funeral home. You get squat out of that. You got to give all the money back. And again, and it makes sense. It's a good thing. It's 100% pre-need trust. You have to put all the money into it. You can't take anything off the top. I think it destroys consumer confidence when you do take money, because you're going to keep 99% of your pre-need anyway. So it doesn't make any sense to pull money out of it to save maybe 1%. So trust issues, like I said, 200 accounts, excuse me. At that point, you were allowed, the trust itself is allowed to take 1% out. If you ever want to start a trust yourself, you're allowed to, but you can't take anything out of it until you hit 200 accounts, everything going into that master account. Commissions are not allowed on older insurance, meaning that somebody comes in and they've got dad's insurance policy from 1972 when he worked at DuPont, and it's got $12,000 in it, and they're counting it against him, so he can't go on a Medicaid. And when he goes on Medicaid, he's going to get his medical bills taken care of, which would be like $20,000 a month, right? What can we do with this? Well, you can take that and you can convert it and make it into the state being beneficiary, with the funeral home being the absolute assignee, meaning that when it's paid out, the money will go to the state of New Jersey, saying that you can't use this as a tax shelter. Let me back up a little bit. The idea goes back to prior to 2000. What people were doing was they would sell mom or dad's house and take all of their assets, and they would go in and open up a $150,000 pre-need policy or pre-need funeral with a funeral home. When the death happened, they would, pay $10,000 on the funeral and then pocket the $140,000 that was there, and they were using it as a shelter. The way the state closed this, they said you can't do this anymore. You anything that is not used towards the funeral needs to come back to the state. So if somebody has an insurance policy, they're absolutely allowed to use that towards their funeral, and they won't keep it as an asset against them. But anything that is left over needs to come back to the state of New Jersey. So if somebody has a fully prepaid whole life insurance policy and it's worth $100,000, fine, you can bank that. Just the state of New Jersey needs to get paid, but the funeral home will be the primary payee, meaning that the funeral is $10,000 and there's $90,000 left over. It goes to the state of New Jersey. It's a paperwork nightmare. It's a real pain in the ass, but it's the only way you can do it legally. If you open up a new insurance policy, meaning you get an insurance license and you sell pre-need that way, you are allowed to receive a commission, but you're not allowed to receive a commission if you are just transferring a previously created insurance policy. So if anybody has questions, please feel free on that one. I know it's very complicated. It's a pain in the ass to do it, but yeah, it's one of those deals where it's not a bad idea to have an insurance license, because somebody comes in, they're 55 and they just want to open up a policy or prepay a funeral for themselves. You can open up a policy and you are allowed a commission on that. And that comes from a newly issued insurance policy. POD accounts, they still exist. Payment on death, meaning that the Jones family comes in, you go, here's the total amount for the funeral bill. It's $10,000. They go down to the local Chase Bank or whatever, and they go, we want to open up a POD account. They go, great. Okay, here's a payment schedule and how much can you pay per month? And they go, $100, 200, 500, whatever the case may be. They go, great, done and done. They set it up. They pay that off, and then that sits and accumulates interest. When the person dies, you go down with the death certificate, you give it to the bank pays the funeral home. Very rare these days, but still allowed. So new for 2019, must notify social services when any refund on an irrevocable prepaid funeral, when there's anything left over. So it used to be $500 and up, meaning that you really still needed to give that back to the state. Somebody comes in, they open an irrevocable prepaid funeral. Remember, you can only do that if you're on Medicaid or within 6 months of going on to Medicaid. And now the state starts paying the person's medical bills. If there used to be $500 or up, you would have to notify social services. Today, if there's a penny left over, you have to notify social services. Look, there was 35 cents left over in this particular account. And that money still needs to go back to the state of New Jersey, but it now just requires us to notify social services. So advertising, this is always fun, right? With advertising, you must list your name as registered with the state board. So you're the Smith Funeral Home today. You don't like the name funeral anymore, and you want to be the Smith Memorial Home. You can't change your advertising until you change your name over to Smith Memorial Home before you can run the ads, right? It has to be the name registered with the state. The manager has to be listed. Novelty items, if you have a small pen or pencil. My uncle used to, never mind, something completely unrelated, something I'm excited to say. My uncle used to make teas, golf tees, and throw them around the golf box. I forget what you call them, wherever you tee off. I don't golf, so I don't know about that, but it would just have the name of the funeral home and the name of the municipality on it. Logo and obit, I have a different slide that we'll talk about that because that's considered an advertisement. Testimonials. You can only have a testimonial if it's somebody who actually used your funeral home. I mean, Tom Brady just retired, right? Let's say you're a big funeral home here and you know, oh, Tom, I'll throw you $1 million if you come and do a commercial for me. You can't do that unless he's actually buried out of the funeral home, right? Or cremated or whatever. He has to have actually used the funeral home. And damn, I'm an Eagles fan, but that guy he was the GOAT. I mean, man, he was just, you can't. He did it in New England, and then he went down to Florida and did it again. I have to give it up to him, man. He's the damn GOAT. It is what it is. Price reductions. All right, so let me bring up a different screen here, because with the price reduction, you can only have a price reduction if it's these same 30 days prior. Now, here's the idea behind this. And you don't see a lot of prices in funeral home has to begin with. It's more like we've been in this area for 85 years, whatever the case may be, right? You've got $300 casket, right? you decide today on the February 3rd on this Thursday, look, I'm going to jack the price up to $600. But tomorrow you run an ad saying if you prepay within the next week, you can get the casket half off. Oh, hold on, I just hit the wrong button. At $300, right? So that's deceptive. It's really like you just jack the price up to then advertise it as half off. You're only anticipating making $300 on it, but now you jacked it up to $600. I know these numbers are not reflective, but you get my point. If you wanted to do that, and again, I've not seen a lot of funeral homes do this, you'd have to wait 30 days, meaning that you'd have to jack the price up to $600, wait a month, and then you can run that ad. And again, a lot of this stuff is very academic in that none of this stuff has been tested. It's there in the code, but nobody's really ever brought suit over it. But again, it's in the code, so they can test you on it. All right, so add an obit. Now, this was more of a South Jersey thing. This was specifically big in the Courier Post, the Camden Courier Post, and the Burlington County Times. What we began seeing, and again, I'm not including this to throw stones at the Chinuskis. I just went to the obits one day and found their obit, and it just had an image I could use. People were running these, and for the longest time, there would be like, I know there was one that had a big lighthouse. It was like, we are your bridge over troubled water, all this stuff. But the state board looked at that and said, no, no, if you're going to do that, you need to pay for that yourself. That's an ad. There's no reason that the family should have to pay for that. And so with obits like this, the newspapers would send two bills, one for the family and then one for the funeral home. And with something like this, you would need to have all of everything you needed in an ad, you would have to include in there, meaning they've got their address, their town, and the manager name, the manager number, but the funeral home would have to pay for this section. Now, if you just ran an obit and it said services 7 to 9 at Chinuski Funeral Home, 1100 Black Horse Pike, and it's just in the text, perfectly fine. It's just when you start to get into these things, or you start putting in your icons and the images you develop for advertising purposes, that's when the state had a problem with it. And that's when it said, no, you got to pay for that, not the family. So remember, advertising includes things we wouldn't even think of. Aerial displays. Again, I've never seen an aerial display for a funeral home. I spent a week in Wildwood Crest in August, and it was wonderful, man. We had such a nice time down there. I traditionally hate the beach, but I had so much fun with the kids down there. Kids really change it, man. It really is something else. But we were watching the planes go by, and I was thinking about this. I've never seen one that said Brand X Funeral Home, right? But they include it in regulations. Circular handbills or flyers, letters, or any other similar item, document, publication, or device used to communicate to the general public to a specific group. Again, new in 2019, all advertising regs extended to the website, the funeral home website, and any social media. So if you've got, funeral home has a Facebook page, they've got a Twitter page, they've got that new one I just heard about. A Getter page, whatever, right? TikTok, whatever. You have to have everything that is required by the state for advertising. Now, fines, general numbers, and these are the ceiling on this. For a first offense on a fine, the ceiling in New Jersey is $10,000. If you get popped for the same thing a second time, and after that, the ceiling is $20,000. Again, I hope nobody ever sees these types of fines in your career, but That's the ceiling on it. All right, so interment, etc. Remember the depth of burial. Burial essentially is, okay, if you have a mausoleum, it doesn't matter. If you think of with general interment, and again, all of this came up in laws, rules, and regulations. If you're just taking a casket and putting it into the ground, the general depth is 4 feet. And the way I've always remembered this is that erase all of this. So if you've got it down, let's say this is a grave, and this is a casket. So the top of it is 4 feet. It's roughly 2 feet from here to the right. It's roughly, yeah. So you think that's about 6 feet, right? It's about 6 feet under if you think about the bottom of it. That's the way I've always remembered it. Now this drops when you talk about children. You talk about children specifically less than 4 feet long. The casket is less than 4 feet long, but that's something I'm going to leave you guys to look up. If somebody is in a vault, none of this counts. A vault can be 1 inch of dirt on top of it. It's perfectly fine. And again, look at the laws, rules, and regulations stuff. Temporary burial, the idea that you can be buried you're waiting for a mausoleum to be built, and they give you up to 4 years on this, but the person has to be marked on their permit, on the burial permit, as a temporary burial. And there's certain things that need to be included on that. And again, I'm going to leave that for you guys to look up. Multiple burial. If you have more than one person in a casket, who needs to approve of that? And this is the normal right to control process, with one exception. The decedent himself can allow to have a multiple burial done. This legislation goes back to the idea that, and it's happened, it's heartbreaking, but should a woman be given birth and the child has died during birth, and now she is dying, and they say, ma'am, like, we're not sure if you can make it. And she says, well, if I don't make it, I want to be buried with my child. And you bury her with the child. And that's sort of why that legislation is written that way. Other than that, should she die without saying anything, her husband can say, well, she and the child should be buried together, right? And then it goes through the normal breakdown of, adult children, the parents, siblings, etc., and so forth. Disinterment. If you have multiple people buried in a grave, and you've got burial A and burial B, and you want to get burial B out, you need the agreement of everybody that you need for burial B, for burial A, because you need to take that person out, take them out, and then put this person back in. Remember, with disinterment, you need the consent of the spouse and all adult children. And I don't know why they write the legislation this way, but the spouse has total control before the person is buried. After they're buried, the kids have just as much control as the spouse does, which is really odd. I've never figured out why they wrote the legislation this way.
Go play. So we're out.
Sorry, I didn't mute that for a second. My wife yelled at the kids. I had to whisper that. So cremation, the crematory, the presence of a licensee is required. I know that things have been blurred over the last almost 2 years, but that's normally the way that it is. Now, the record keeping, this goes back to laws, rules, and regs as well. There's a whole list of things that the record keeping that the crematory needs to keep. And it's things like name of deceased, the next of kin, the funeral home information, but also what was the disposition of the cremated remains. That may be just handed off to the funeral home, but it may be they're taking them out and scattering them on behalf of the family. So take a look at that. Like I said, I'm specifically leaving that out on purpose. record keeping, or I'm sorry, let me jump over that. The unclaimed cremated remains. Remember, you have to wait at least a year, and then you have to do your due diligence in trying to contact someone to let them know you're going to dispose of these cremated remains, and you have to dispose them if you choose to in a respectful manner. You can't just take them and toss them in the garbage. All right, so we're coming down to the end of it here. New issues for 2019. And again, I don't know if you're going to see questions on this. This is the first time. There's a thing called the sunset laws in New Jersey. I think most states have these, where after 7 years, you need to take a look at laws, rules, and regulations and see what is still relevant. And then they update them. So in 2019, sorry, the kids are getting yelled at. Statement at the top of the statement of funeral goods and services. This statement is subject to change by agreement of both parties, meaning both parties sign off on it. It's perfectly fine to do so. So I had this issue, I'll say, a year ago now, where I wrote up a whole, probably closer to 2 years. It doesn't matter. Like, I wrote up a whole statement of funeral goods and services. I screwed something up at the bottom where I just wrote the wrong number, and I was like, ugh. And the family didn't care. It's just, it was I had taken it on, let me rewrite, and I had to write the whole darn thing up again. It only takes 4 or 5 minutes, but if it was a situation now, I could just go, I wrote in 300, actually 400, and we could both initial on it, and it would be fine. The check boxes for sex has been removed, and that sex and gender and those ideas become much more complicated over the past couple of years. So instead of just having male or female, it's just, okay, the sex of the individual. Instead of a check mark, you can write in if somebody is whatever they are. Sanitary care without embalming, it's been changed to other prep of body. Use of facilities and staff for viewing it's been switched to visitation and viewing. Added use of equipment and staff for graveside to the line, including accompaniment of remains to place a final position. So they've just switched some of the wording around, and I doubt you're going to see questions about some of these, but I just included it just in case. Receiving and reporting remains are now on different lines. They used to be on the same line. You have to specify the one. Optional package service section. If an optional package service is selected, categories 1 through 3 are not applicable. And they've now changed that to, if you select an optional package, see general price list for a list of included services. And the first question every funeral director I knew asked was, well, does this allow for other items like a memorial service to be added to a direct cremation? And the answer is no. If you're doing a direct cremation, it is solely that. It is just a direct cremation. There's no service, nothing, done and done. It is that line and that line only, other than if they run an ovid or something, that's fine, but you're not doing any formal services. At least not services that you're included with, or the funeral home is. The way that the state board viewed this was, no, if you're going to have somebody come in for a memorial service, you can't write it up with a direct cremation plus. You have to write in your basic service fee, removal, transfer to the crematory, use of funeral home and staff for memorial service, et cetera, and so forth. So you can't write it up with it. I know a lot of funeral homes do this, but by the letter of the law, you can't just write up basic service fee, or I'm sorry, direct cremation plus memorial service. It cannot be done that way legally. So if you see questions about that, yeah, it's just not, you're not allowed to do that. Again, this is minor stuff. This is minutia. I'm just including church or clergy, change to officiant, place of worship, newspaper to obituary charge, pallbearers removed. So you can still have pallbearers. You just need to write it into a cash advance line, pallbearers. Price reduction removed, but can be written above grand total, meaning that somebody picks a package and that package is $700 to $100 less than if you had gotten everything together. You have to write in price reduction, which makes sense because a lot of times if price reduction was already there, people would look at it and go, well, why am I not getting a price reduction? We didn't pick one of these options, so you can't get a price reduction. So it's just making it a little bit clearer, I suppose. So miscellaneous items, where to file the death certificate. There's the 3 places where you can get that, you can file a death certificate, and then 4 places you can get the death certificate. Remember, the municipality of death, municipality of the funeral home, and municipality of, yes, the place of disposition. Yes, sweetheart.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm talking to my class.
What is his name?
All right, well, we're down to the last couple of slides, so I'll just pull you up. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. This is what's making all the noise.
Oh,
All right, so you can just see yourself on there.
Yeah.
All right, cost of the permit. Cost of permit is $5. Was 15 for a while. And this is the only time I've ever seen the state drop.
I don't know what this.
This is the only time I've ever seen the state drop a charge down. They said they would jack it up to 15 to develop EDRS, and then they would drop it down when they were done, and they actually did. Everybody was shocked over that one. Renting a funeral home to another facility. Remember, you need a special use. Remember, you need a special use permit for that. You have to request that from the state board. It can't just be done. Nobody does this, by the way, but you're supposed to request a special permit from the state board, special allowance to do so. A receiving vault. And again, all of this stuff can be found in the laws, rules, and regulations notes. A receiving vault you'll never see. My predecessor, I asked him when I first started teaching the class, I was like, what the hell is a receiving vault? He's like, oh yeah, I saw one in like 1971. It's an area that you can hold a body if the ground is too cold to actually dig into it. Like if you were in Maine or something like that in January or February. All right.
Okay.
Quiet color. And then there are all these regulations around it. That it has to either be 5 feet below ground, or it has to be built in a way to stop noxious fumes from coming out, or you can't hold somebody there for more than 48 hours if they were not embalmed. You're never going to deal with this in practice, ever, ever, ever. But for testing purposes, all right. So that's all it took. Anyway, you're never going to see this in practice, but it's one of those deals. So just know it for testing and then promptly forget it. Now, one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, and you don't have to remember the number, 1336, 5.6, A26, every funeral home has to have clear or flesh-colored adhesive tape. And this popped up in the last 5 years. It didn't exist before that. And this came from one single complaint to the state board where somebody looked through somebody's sleeve and they could see duct tape holding down plastics, and they made a complaint to the state. And the state came out and said, well, every funeral home needs to have clear, white, or flesh-colored adhesive tape. And everyone said, what the hell is flesh-colored? How do you figure that? How do you define that? And the state said, well, you could just figure that out on your own, whatever the hell that means. It's very dumb regulation, but it's just something to know in case they ask you questions on it. It really is one of the dumber regs I've ever seen. So welfare versus Medicaid. I kind of doubt you're going to see questions on this because they just changed the amounts on this. When Governor Murphy signed something in, take a look at the old amounts, the 2246, the 5, blanking what it is, 530 or whatever it is for the cemetery, and the amount that the family can contribute. Take a look at that, and then what is allowed for somebody who's 6 days to 2 years old, and then somebody who is a stillborn to 6 days old. On the form to use. Remember, this is welfare. It's not Medicaid. We call it Medicaid. It's really a welfare funeral. The form to use is the WFNJ 11, Work First, New Jersey 11. It used to be the PA being Public Assistance 11. I've had students tell me they've seen both of those form numbers used on the test. So WFNJ, Work First, New Jersey 11, or PA, Public Assistance, New Jersey 11. 11, I think, is really what you're looking for on that one. And where the claim to be submitted, it's done at a county level. I've been in Burlington County for the last 15 years or so, and Burlington County is very easy to deal with. Camden County is very difficult to deal with because they deal with a lot of these claims just because of Camden City. In Burlington, you can just call them up and they'll tell you, yeah, the person's cleared. In Camden, they put up some blockades to it, and you got to send in some paperwork. You got to wait 48 hours. They'll get back to you. Maybe they're cleared, maybe they're not. So it's done at a county level, and every county is different. So emergency burial permit, I should remove that. You probably not see any questions, but this is prior to EDRS. If you needed an emergency burial permit, there was a long weekend and you needed somebody buried within 48 hours, you'd need to go to a judge, and they would issue the burial permit. If there's no person in charge of cemetery. So again, this goes back to, again, laws, rules, and regs stuff. If there's no person in charge of a cemetery, the funeral director is in charge of filing the burial paperwork, meaning that if there's a little cemetery in a township that nobody's been buried in since 1968, you can still bury people there, but it's just you need to get a grave digger in, and then the funeral director files the paperwork. Now, keep in mind the idea that if you bring in, and again, this is a situation you'll never see in practice, but in theory, if you bring somebody in from out of state and they are a veteran, and you're going into a cemetery that does not have anybody in charge of it, the funeral director is then compelled to notify the person in charge of veteran burial in whatever county they're buried that this veteran is buried there at the cemetery. Otherwise, they assume that this would be done either via EDRS or by the person running the cemetery. Now, the communicable disease list, remember that. And there's 5 of them. I have them listed later. And reporting veteran staff, we already talked about. So EDRS, it is what it is. Burial at sea, take a look at the requirements for this. I don't remember these. It's not something I covered in laws, rules, and regs, but it is something you would have covered in principles, and it's right in the beginning of the funeral service supplement. The depth that you need to go, how far you need to go out to sea, how much weight you need to put on the casket, and how many holes you need to dig into it. Probably something you'll never see in your career, but just something that pops up. So signatures on the death certificate and for disinterment. For disinterment, remember there's 7 of them. And that's all covered in laws, rules, and regs. I doubt they're going to ask you for all 7, but what is the general process of disinterment? Who needs to sign the statement of funeral goods and services? And actually, and this last one's a little bit of a trick one. Nobody really needs to sign an FTC disclosure or disclaimer. They need to be included on general price lists and on the statement, well, I suppose over the statement of funeral goods and services, but it's not something you need to have the family sign off on that they've received. On the statement of funeral goods and services, there are 3 of them. Now, for state purposes, I'll just bring up the 2. The embalming, the embalming disclosure, and the disclosure regarding that you only get charged for the items that you have chosen. At a national level, there is a 3rd one about cash advances, because some states allow you to mark up cash advances. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, even New York will not allow you to do so. So it's not included on the statement of funeral goods and services. New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, etc. But when you're taking the national, you need to be cognizant of that. All right, so just a couple more slides here, then we'll wrap up. Uniform anatomical. The Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. This basically says when somebody gives a body to a medical school, or even us, we're covered under this. If somebody called up and said, I want my mom's body back, we can say, go pound sand. They don't like give us the body the same way they would a funeral home. They bequeath the body to us. I never would keep a body. Like if somebody called up and said we want that, it was great. Let's work something out. But we got a table in today. No, actually, it came in on Friday. This thing cost $83,000. And what this has in it is 6 or 7 bodies that have been completely dissected in a way that preserves them forever, but it takes 6 or 7 months to do so. And they slice off the tiniest bit, right? They'll start at the top and they'll slice off a millimeter of tissue and they preserve it. And then they keep going and going and going and going and going and going all the way through the body. So everything's been digitized and you can go in and it looks like a giant iPad and you just hit a button and go case 5, give me the vascular system. Oop, you get that. It's wild, man. It's some wild stuff, man. It really is. And you're halfway through that process, right? And the company is now to cut to here. And the family goes, we want the body back. What the hell are we going to do in this situation? So that's why this legislation exists. Victims of crime compensation, if somebody is a victim of violent crime, somebody's been murdered, whatever, there is money out there for them. And it's just, again, good to be aware of that concept. And I don't think they're going to ask you how much, but just the general concepts of it. Medical waste. We are required in New Jersey to report medical waste. They've changed the regulation on this over the last couple of years. We used to have to report regardless of the size of the funeral home. Now if it's less than 400 calls a year, we don't have to report the exact amount, but we still have to take anything that is if there's a drop of blood on a paper towel, great, throw it away. If you've got a sheet and it's coated through with blood, all right, that's regulated medical waste. If there's a medical device coming off of a body, that is medical waste, right? So what would you be comfortable throwing away in your trash can at your house is really sort of what the criteria comes down to with that. Like I wouldn't take a colostomy bag of somebody and just throw it into my garbage. Will's terminology, that's basic stuff from law. Just, again, a good thing to review before you take the exam. I don't think you're seeing a lot on that, but okay, so prohibited embalming compounds. Look at this. Again, as soon as you're done all the testing, as soon as you're done the New Jersey test, you can promptly forget this. You don't make embalming fluid. It doesn't matter. It's just, all right, arsenic, lead, mercury, zinc, silver, antimony, chloral, any poisons, alkaloid, copper, cyanogen. Great. If you start cooking up embalming fluid in your backyard, keep this regulation in mind. I kind of doubt it's going to happen, though. And finally, the communicable diseases, which are smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, typhus fever, and plague. Again, just stuff to keep in mind. All stuff. If any bodies that you have this, you're supposed to notify the Department of Health within 12 hours. I've had students who have told me they've had bodies with this. They've tried to contact the health department. They're like, "What the hell do you want out of me?" I also have a doctor in the program right now who she says that they're supposed to notify anybody. They're supposed to notify the Department of Health of anybody in the hospital that has this. So they should already have this information, but it's one of those things you will rarely see in your career, but you need to have it for testing purposes. I believe that's the last slide. Oh, there we go. All right, good. Any questions about any of that? We've been here for like an hour and a half, man. So if there's questions, I haven't seen anything in the chat, but anybody have questions, comments, concerns, anything like that?
Mr. Daly, so where is the link so we can rewatch this?
Fantastic. Guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to post it to the YouTube page. It'll be available to everybody. I'll put the links in there as far as, like, I'm not going to make it, like, you won't need the link for it. If you just go to MCCC Funeral Service program, it'll be there. Feel free to download it. Feel free to watch it. The links will be there with the slides and everything else I put in there. And if you have questions between now and when you take the exam, feel free to reach out to me. And I wish you guys the best on the exam. Study those regs, study the statutes. look over everything from laws, rules, and regulations, and you should be in good shape. We've had a pretty good pass rate on this thing, but study it, make sure to know it, and like I said, let me know how you do. Okay. You're very welcome, Suzanne. All right. Take care, guys. I'm going to cut out and put my youngest to bed because she's ornery and she was in school today and she's been bouncing off the walls. And, it is what it is. And if anybody has emailed me, like Kevin, I saw that you emailed me earlier. I haven't had a chance to get back to you. I've been working on an annual report. It's a whole thing that I do every year. I'll get back to you at some point, probably tomorrow. It's a very time consuming thing. So take care, folks. And anything I can do in the meantime, feel free to reach out.